How does fashion impact the people who make it and the world we live in? In 2013, an 8-story garment factory making clothes for major Western brands collapsed in Bangladesh. It killed more than 1,000 workers and injured thousands more. The catastrophe motivated American filmmaker Andrew Morgan to search for answers. His documentary, The True Cost, looks at both the human and environmental cost of fast fashion.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win, that consumers in the rich world would get cheaper goods and people in the poorer parts of the world would get jobs, and that those jobs would give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous, rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers properly?
The actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
My God, we can do better than this.
Not surprisingly, the film is raising eyebrows at film festivals and sparking debate within the fashion media around the world. Here to discuss the film is Andrew Morgan. We want to welcome you to Full Frame.
Great to be here.
My God, we can do so much better. That soundbite really encapsulates things. How did the factory collapse impact you, and did that set you on this journey?
Yeah, it did. It was kind of my way into the story. I was finishing up my last film, and I walked in to get my coffee one morning, and I looked down at the cover of the New York Times, and I remember seeing this photograph of these two boys that were kind of similar in age to my own boys at home, and they were standing in front of this just enormous wall of missing person signs, and it just touched me deeply, and I picked up the paper and started reading about this factory collapse, and I remember standing there that morning thinking two things. One, how is it possible that an industry this powerful and profitable is doing business in such a way, as I was reading, that continues to lead to the loss and lessening of life? And also, maybe more chilling, I remember standing there that morning thinking, how is it possible that I've never stopped to think about where my clothes came from? And that kind of began a series of questions that ultimately led to the film.
How difficult was it, though? I mean, one of the things, and you and I have chatted a little bit about this, one of the things about making clothes is you have to stitch, and you have to stitch, and you have to stitch. And all of that stitching, you put it together and you have a garment. You had to stitch and stitch and stitch. There's so many different layers to this story. I mean, I've seen pieces of it, but one of the things I really like about your film is it's everything out there. Were you surprised at some of the stitchery that you had to come up with?
Well, they always say ignorance is bliss, right? So when you start, you don't know how daunting something is. But I think what I decided right away was that I didn't want to make a film about Bangladesh. So at the time, Rana Plaza had just collapsed, and that was dominating the news. And I didn't just want to make a film because this isn't just a Bangladesh issue to me. It's truly one of the most uniquely global issues. And so right away it was like, I want to make a film that does move all over the world, that does touch on all these issues, and kind of creates an introduction to these ideas for someone like myself who had never thought of them before. Like, I kind of intentionally want to overwhelm someone who has never come in contact with this. And that kind of then informed the scope and the size and everything else.
Let's talk a little bit about fast fashion. I want to run a clip, and then we'll talk on the backside of this.
Well, globalized production basically means that all of the making of goods has been outsourced to low-cost economies, particularly where wages are very low and kept low. And what that means is that those at the top of the value chain, they get to choose where the products are being made, and they get to switch. If, for example, one factory says, we can't make it that cheap anymore, the brand will say, well, we're not going to come to you anymore, we're going to switch to another place which is cheaper.
In the West, they're using everyday low price. So every day they're hampering me and I'm hampering my workers. This is how it is. They are competing, the stores are competing in there. When the stores are coming to us for an order and negotiating, they're telling, look, that particular store is selling this shirt with like $5, so I needed to sell it in the $4. So you better squeeze your price, so we are squeezing. Then other store is coming and selling, hey, they're selling it the $4, So the target price is 3. If you can meet the 3, you are getting business, otherwise you are not getting. Because we want that business so badly and we don't have other options, okay, every time we are trying to survive actually.
Ultimately, something's going to give. Either the price of the product has to go up, or manufacturers have to shut down or cut corners to make it work.
You really get the sense of this feeling of the squeeze. He's not the only one that talks about it. You have one person who talked about, prices have gone up for this and that.
Yeah.
Prices actually are not going up when it comes to clothing, and yet, we still have to produce this stuff. It really kind of gets at the heart of the problem, and it doesn't just impact people, it impacts the environment too.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, fashion clothing is a deflationary product, and that means, as you say, that it's gotten cheaper. It's gotten dramatically cheaper over just my lifetime. And when you think about it, you step back and you realize, wait a second, materials haven't gotten cheaper. Cost of shipping hasn't gotten cheaper. So the only part of that equation that you can squeeze is human labor. And so you very quickly begin to understand this magical formula that's generating clothing at just unprecedented low price points. There's a cost to that. There's a cost to that when it pertains to human labor, and then certainly, as you suggest, there's a price when it comes to the environment.
There was a soundbite in the film that really struck me where it's this voluntary code of conduct. We want these people to do all of these things, but it's almost like they're kind of washing their hands. We have this out there. We want them to do this, but as he says, he's going to get pinched. I don't care about that. You got to come in at $3 or $4.
Yeah. I mean, and then we act surprised when that system creates incredible tragedy. I think it's a model that's set up on absolutely no responsibility. So it was eye-opening for me to learn that the brands, that we buy clothes from here in the West, they don't own the factories that they produce in, and by extension, they don't employ the workers that make those clothes. So there's a completely disassociated, non-responsible supply chain put in place where they're able to wash their hands. Anytime something happens, they can act surprised, they can act, when in fact, if you look at the model itself is creating just incredible strains, both in terms of people not making enough to live, and also conditions that are just inhumane.
But they work so hard at putting the model together. If they work just as hard to perhaps pay these people better, I mean, we're looking at a much nicer world, aren't we?
Well, here's the secret. I think the whole model has been made possible by the assumption, the arrogant assumption, that you and I will not care enough to ask questions. And I think this could change dramatically, and is beginning to change, because there's kind of an awakening taking place in the world where I think for a long time we've grown up in a story where we've been cast as the consumer. And if you're just a consumer, it's like your identity, your role in the equation is just to be someone who buys things, almost like you're standing at the end of a long conveyor belt of the world and you're just taking it in. But I think what's occurring to a lot of people right now in this moment is actually my choices when I buy, they have an impact. And that impact, it's not that someone else is maybe no one's taking care of those people. Maybe it's not a win-win-win-win. Maybe I'm benefiting on the backs of something that I would never want to support. And so I think as people begin to turn that corner and to reassert more responsibility again, to say, you know what, if I was buying this, if this was produced in a facility around the corner of my community, I would never condone it. But just because I've been detached, and just because I've kind of been taught to only see my part of the equation, huge portions of the world have kind of fallen through the cracks. And that could change, though,
Yeah, well, and it's all veiled. It's behind the curtain. We don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, think about advertising. You think about the shopping experience. Think about going to a mall. It's an incredibly intoxicating, intentional environment to make you think about you. And so when you kind of step outside of that and say, wait a minute, there's a bigger story going on in the world, and I'm actually playing a role in that story. I'm a human being. I have a responsibility. I'm more than a consumer. That's when you kind of begin to see it differently.
Back years ago, we all heard about the blood diamonds. No one thinks that I'm wearing a blood blouse or a blood set of trousers, but once you listen to this next soundbite, you may look at things differently. Let's look at this, and then I want to get your thoughts.
এটা তৈরি করি কত কষ্ট করে আমরা এখানে চাকরি করে এটা তৈরি করে বাংলাদেশে পারে এটা অবশ্যই তারা জানে না তারা শুধু পায় আর পরে কিন্তু এটা আমি মনে করি যে আমাদের রক্ত দিয়ে এটা তৈরি হয় যেহেতু দেখা যায় অনেক সময় দেখা যায় গার্মেন্টসে চাকরি করতে যায় অনেক মেয়েগো জীবনও যায়। যেমন আমাদের এই কিছুদিন এক বছর আগে রানা প্লাজার ঘোষণা পড়ছে, আমাদের প্রচণ্ড শ্রমিক মারা গেছে। তাই আমি মনে করি এটা আমাদের অনেক কষ্টের পরিশ্রম। আমরা চাই না যে, আমি চাই না যে বাইরের লোকেও এরকম আমাদের রক্তের জিনিস তারা ব্যবহার করে। আমরা চাই যেন আমরা আরেকটু গার্মেন্টসে উন্নত মালিক যেন আরেকটু সতর্ক হয়। যেমন রানা প্লাজার ঘোষণা পড়ছে, আমি চাই না যে রানা প্লাজারের মালিকের মতো আর অন্য মালিক এরকম রিস্ক নিয়ে এবং এরকম বিল্ডিংয়ে ওয়ার্কারদের নিয়ে কাজ করে এবং আরও এরকম শ্রমিক মারা যায়, আরও অনেক মায়ের কোল খালি হয়। আমি এটা কোনোদিনও চাই না। আমি চাই আমাদের আর একটু মালিক সতর্ক হোক, এটাই যেন আমাদের একটু দেখে।
Incredibly powerful. When she tells her story to you, that gives you an enormous responsibility. You know, how do I put this together in such a way that her voice is heard and has an impact, like you were saying, to perhaps change the dynamic?
Well, that was what was really important in making the film, I think, is that word voice. Like, this is a group of people who just have not had a voice in the equation. And it's interesting to grow up by no doing of my own in a situation in the world where, like, I have a voice, I can speak, I can stand up for the things that I care about, I can protest the things that aren't right in my world. And that hasn't been afforded to them in many, many ways. And so I think when we came in to make the film, one of the big desires was, let's not talk about these people. Let's actually hear from them. I think a lot of times we can kind of objectify some of these things, and to actually spend time and hours and days and weeks in the lives of these people and begin to understand, you know, their concerns and and let them voice that is incredibly powerful. And now to see the film come out and to see hugely powerful, influential people in the world listening to someone like Shima, that's an honor, you know.
And their voice has been in the wilderness, like you said. It's not been a voice heard, but there are voices out there in the fashion industry that have been heard. Let's listen to another clip, and then I want to talk to you about this.
Does it bother me that people are working in a factory making clothes for Americans or for, you know, Europeans, or that that's how they're spending their lives? Is that what you're kind of asking me?
Yeah, sure.
No, I mean, you know, they're doing a job. There are a lot worse things that they can be doing.
I love you because you're like, yeah, and I hope you say what I hope you're going to say. And she said it, didn't she?
Yeah.
But she's not the only one that says it. I mean, you have people after people saying, look, they could be working in coal mines. That's very dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, they try and come up with some kind of way to justify this.
Well, I think justify is the right word. I think I began to notice as we started working on the film, this is very offensive. This idea of challenging globalized labor and the role that it plays in our lives, people get very, I didn't expect just how touchy this was. And it has political roots, but it's something deeper than that. And it's like a narrative that you heard her allude to that basically says, look, these jobs could be horrible. You know, they could have buildings collapsing on their heads. They could be not making enough to keep their families together. All of these things could be true, but it would be worse if they didn't have these jobs. And it's really deceiving because there's a part of truth in it. And the part of truth is that, yes, these jobs are really, really important. And any effort that we do should be very cognizant of that. You know, workers will tell you that. It's really important, even a bad job. But I think what I'm asking in the film is, why is that the best we can do? Like, why is that a zero-sum game? Why is something inhumane that we're exploiting and profiting hugely off of, that could be much improved, why is it always that or nothing? Why isn't it that or better? Like, let's bring those people along. The story for a long time has been that even in areas of extreme exploitation, it's leading to something better. It's a needing stepping stone for that part of the world, and it's going to always, you know, ratchet on up. But what a lot of studies are starting to suggest now is that actually there's a level of exploitation at which point you're not empowering and you're not developing. You're actually further entrenching systems of poverty. And so that's why that idea began to be something that we had to confront, is it's not enough. It's not enough to say we're doing something that's better than nothing.
You know, one of the other things that I thought was fantastic in your film, and I didn't think about it, is if you're going to buy a $4 shirt and then next week you're going to go buy a $3 shirt, suddenly you have enough money to buy 7 or 8 of those, and then suddenly your closet's full of them. And so now you're going to give them away to charity, and you're going to help people who don't have the $4 shirts. But then you talk about that too. They all end up lumped together, and they're shipped off, and now people don't have jobs in Haiti. I mean, it was like, how did you find that? I mean, I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, well, it was just, I mean, it was really shocking research that we were doing. And I mean, yeah, you know, if you live in America, less than 10% of the clothing that's donated to thrift stores, so Goodwill, so, you know, whatever you go drop your clothes off, less than 10% of that is sold in the thrift stores, and 90+% of that is shipped overseas. And a lot of that is sold in the secondhand markets, like the Pepe market in Port-au-Prince that you're referring to, and in Africa, in huge parts of Africa. And it's having a crippling effect on the local tailoring sectors in those countries. And even that is too much, and it really does end up in landfills. I mean, there is a waste component of this that's staggering. And it is the consequence of clothing going from something that we used to have and hold on to and value and repair and pass down, to suddenly it's so cheap that it is disposable. Like, it's actually treated like a disposable good now. So you have clothing coming in and out of people's wardrobes at a just alarming rate. And it was amazing to, you know, country after country after country around the world to stand in landfills and just look at clothing, like literal clothing waste farther than my eyes could see. And when you begin to realize that, you know, a lot of that's non-synthetic fibers that don't break down. You're talking about an ecological issue, not even mentioning what it took to make the clothes from a resource standpoint, but just a waste standpoint that just doesn't add up.
What about fair trade fashion? I mean, how do you find out what's out there that's right?
Yeah, well, fair trade fashion is, you know, built on an incredibly simple notion that they're going to take care of all the hearts and hands that touch the things that are being made. And so it kind of looks all the way through the supply chain and says there is a responsibility to the makers. There's a responsibility all the way through to ensure living wages, to ensure some empowerment to these communities. And so when you pick up a piece of clothing that's made and has fair trade labeling, yeah, you know right away it is vastly an improvement to everyone a part of that supply chain. And along with fair trade, you know, just other ways, it's kind of, you know, been called slow fashion. A lot of intentional companies that are coming online now saying, we're going to tell you more about our process. We're going to show you the makers. We're going to own the factory. We're going to disclose the economic breakdown. When you pay, here's where the money goes. You know, a lot of really imaginative, fascinating companies. And we've got a good list at truecostmovie.com. There's also just, if you just search for it, if you search for slow fashion companies, slow fashion lists, there's more every day. And it's growing and incredibly hopeful. A lot of good stuff to support.
Well, we'll end on a hopeful note, which I like. Andrew, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.